The thing about filing is that nobody thinks about it until something goes wrong. 22 years I sat in the basement of Hargrove City Hall, Hargrove, Pennsylvania. Population 31,000. Processing property records, easement disputes, zoning variance applications, and the occasional Freedom of Information request from a retiree convinced the city was hiding something about the water table. 22 years of paper cuts and microfiche and the particular smell of a room where documents go to be forgotten. That mix of old toner, damp cardboard, and the adhesive on classification labels that breaks down over decades into something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left in a desk drawer. My name is Ruth Kavanaugh. I was 47 years old on April 9th, the day that matters. 5'6", 155 pounds, brown hair I'd stopped coloring 2 years prior because the salon on Maple closed, and I couldn't justify the drive to Allentown for vanity. I wore reading glasses on a chain because I lost 3 pairs in the stacks before admitting that hanging them around my neck like a librarian cliché was the only system that worked. I had no husband. I had an ex-husband, Gerald, who lived in Scranton with a woman who sold essential oils. And I had a 17-year-old son, Eli, who was supposed to be in 3rd period chemistry at Hargrove High School that morning, and who, as of the moment I'm telling you this, I have not confirmed is alive. I need to say that now so you understand what kind of story this is. April 9th was a Wednesday. It had been raining since Monday. A slow, steady, mid-spring rain that overwhelmed the storm drains along Commerce Street and sent water creeping into the City Hall basement through the same crack in the foundation I'd been reporting to maintenance for 6 years. The crack ran along the east wall of the records room, behind a shelf of deed books dating to 1947, and every April it wept, not gushed, wept, enough moisture to curl the pages of anything stored within 2 feet of the floor, which was why I'd moved the oldest documents to higher shelves years ago, a decision I made alone, told no one about, and for which I received no acknowledgement, which is the entire story of my career condensed into a single act of quiet competence nobody noticed. That morning I came in early, 7:15, because the rain had been especially heavy overnight, and I wanted to check the crack before the water reached anything I cared about. The building was mostly empty. Margaret at the front desk wasn't due until 8. Mayor Colvin's office was dark. The second-floor departments, planning, code enforcement, the treasurer didn't populate until 8:30 on a good day. I had the building to myself, which was my favorite version of it. Just me and the fluorescent lights and the hum of the HVAC system that had been installed in 1988 and sounded like it remembered that fact with bitterness. The basement was wet, not flooded, but the crack had been active overnight, and there was a film of water across the concrete floor extending about 8 feet from the east wall. I could see it had reached the bottom shelf of Cabinet Row G, which held property survey plats from the 1960s. Not critical, most of those had been digitized in 2016, but I wasn't the kind of person who let water touch paper if I could prevent it. I pulled on the rubber boots I kept under my desk. I grabbed a stack of plastic bins from the supply closet, and I started moving the lowest shelf contents of Row G to higher ground, one armload at a time, in the quiet of an empty building, with rain tapping on the narrow basement windows. Doing the work that nobody would see and nobody would thank me for, because that is what I did. That is who I was. The third armload included a manila folder so old it had gone the color of weak tea. Inside it were architectural drawings, not survey plats, not property records, but building plans, specifically building plans for Hargrove City Hall itself, dated September 1962, stamped Civil Defense, restricted distribution, and signed by someone named R.P. Olmsted, structural engineer, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Emergency Management. I'd worked in this basement for 22 years. I knew the building's current floor plan by heart. Every closet, every junction box, every disused bathroom that had been converted to storage. But these drawings showed something I'd never seen. Below the basement level I occupied, drawn in precise blue ink, was another level. A sub-basement, labeled War Room/Emergency Operations Center/Capacity, 120 persons/30-day sustainment. Beneath that, a third level, Utilities/Ventilation/Water/Egress Tunnel. See Sheet 14. I was looking at Sheet 7. Sheet 14 was not in the folder. I want to be precise about what happened next because the timing matters, and my memory, despite everything, is reliable on this. I have spent a professional lifetime training myself to be exact about records, about dates, about which version of a document supersedes which, and that habit didn't disappear when the world above me started coming apart. At 7:41. I know because I checked my watch. A digital Casio I'd worn since 2009. I heard the first siren. Not a fire truck, not an ambulance. The city's emergency alert siren. The one mounted on the roof of the fire station 2 blocks east. The one they tested at noon on the first Wednesday of every month, and which I had never, in 22 years, heard activate outside of a test. It wailed for approximately 90 seconds. Then it stopped. Then it started again. Then it stopped. The pattern was wrong. Tests are a single 30-second tone. This was ragged, as if someone was triggering it manually, hitting the switch and releasing it, hitting it again. I set the 1962 plans on my desk. I climbed the stairs to the first floor. Through the glass doors of the main entrance, I could see Commerce Street. The rain had eased to a mist. A car was stopped in the middle of the street. Not parked, stopped. Driver's door open, engine running, no driver. Beyond it, 2 more cars, also stopped, one angled up on the sidewalk. A woman I didn't recognize was running east on Commerce, full sprint, in office clothes and bare feet. She didn't look back. Margaret arrived. I heard her before I saw her. The sound of the side entrance slamming, her breathing, her shoes on the linoleum. She came around the corner into the lobby, and she was gray. Not pale. Gray, the way skin looks when blood has genuinely retreated from the surface. Ruth, lock the door. What's happening? Lock the goddamn door, Ruth. I locked the front entrance. Margaret locked the side. She was 54, a grandmother, a woman who kept butterscotch candies in a bowl on her desk and called everyone hun. I'd never heard her swear. Someone attacked Glenn Fedorov outside the post office, she said. She was leaning against the wall, holding her purse against her chest like a shield. Bit him, on the neck. He went down, and the person did it, Ruth. There was something wrong with the person. The way they moved. Like they were being operated by someone who'd only had it described to them. Did you call 911? The line is busy. Every line is busy. My phone. She held it up. The screen showed a failed call. I tried Daryl. Daryl was her husband. Nothing. I thought about Eli. Third period chemistry. Hargrove High was 1.5 miles northeast, up the hill across Broad Street. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. The voicemail he'd recorded at 14 and never updated, his voice cracking on the word message. I called again. Same result. I texted, "Where are you? Stay inside. Call me." The text showed as delivered. No response. At 7:52, somebody tried the front door. A man in a brown jacket, 40-ish, pressing his face against the glass, pulling on the handle. He looked normal. Scared, but normal. He was shouting something I could hear muffled through the glass. "Let me in. They're on Broad Street. Let me in." I looked at Margaret. She nodded. I unlocked the door. His name was Wade Pressler. He was a FedEx driver out of the Bethlehem Distribution Center on his morning route. He'd been delivering a package to the accounting firm on Broad when he saw 3 people. His word was people, and he used it with visible doubt. Dragging a mail carrier to the ground in the parking lot of the Presbyterian Church. He'd run. He'd seen our door. He was out of breath and his hands were shaking, and there was a scratch on his right forearm that Margaret and I both looked at, and that he noticed us looking at. "A branch," he said, "running through the lot. There's a holly bush by the—" "Okay," I said. "Not a bite." "Okay." The sirens again. Through the front windows, I could see more cars stopped in the street, some with doors open, some with people still inside, sitting motionless in a way that didn't look like waiting. It looked like the opposite of waiting, like arrival, like something had reached its destination and was settling in. I went back downstairs and picked up the 1962 blueprints. I need to explain what I saw on those drawings, because the next 16 hours of my life were governed by blue ink on disintegrating paper. And every decision I made was an act of trust in a structural engineer named R.P. Olmsted, who had been dead for probably 30 years. The current basement of Hargrove City Hall, my office, the records room, the utility closet, the disused coal room from the building's original 1921 boiler system, sat at approximately 12 feet below street level. According to Olmsted's plans, a reinforced concrete stairwell descended from the coal room to a sub-basement at 26 feet below grade. This lower level contained what the drawings labeled as the war room, a single large rectangular space, roughly 40 by 60 feet, with a separate communications alcove, a mechanical room housing independent ventilation and water supply, and a storage area designated provisions, 30-day, 120 persons. Below the war room, at 38 feet below grade, was the utility level, water tanks, a diesel generator, fuel storage, and the start of what the plans called emergency egress tunnel, 847 feet to surface terminus at Riverside Park, an escape tunnel, 847 feet long, exiting at Riverside Park, which was 3 blocks south of City Hall, on the bank of the Lehigh River. If the tunnel existed, if it was complete, if 62 years of groundwater, settlement, and institutional forgetting hadn't collapsed it. The coal room was at the far end of the basement, past the boiler that had been decommissioned in 1978 and replaced by a gas furnace. I'd been in there once, maybe twice, to store surplus office chairs. It was a 12 by 12 cube of blackened brick, empty except for a coal chute in the ceiling that had been welded shut and, against the south wall, a steel door. I'd seen that door. I'd noted it the way you note any fixed feature of a space you occupy daily. You absorb it into the background, file it under "always been there," and stop seeing it. It was painted the same institutional gray as the walls. It had no handle on this side, just a keyhole and a flush pull ring recessed into the steel. I'd assumed it was a sealed utility access, maybe an old electrical vault, maybe a dead end bricked up during one of the building's renovations. I went to the coal room. I stood in front of the door. The pull ring was corroded but intact. I hooked my finger through it and pulled. Nothing. Locked or seized or both. I went back upstairs. Margaret and Wade were in the lobby. The street outside had gotten worse. I could see a figure moving on the sidewalk across from City Hall with that gait Margaret had described. Mechanical, purposeful, wrong. Wade had moved away from the windows and was sitting on the floor behind the reception desk, which was a reasonable choice. "There's a lower level," I said. "Below the basement. A Cold War shelter." I found the plans. Margaret looked at me the way people always looked at me when I said something about the building. Politely, with faint surprise that I was still talking. "A shelter? A civil defense installation, 1962. Rated for 120 people, 30 days of supplies. It has its own water and ventilation. You're sure?" "I'm holding the blueprints. Have you been down there?" "The door is locked." Wade stood up. He was bigger than I'd registered initially. 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with the kind of working fitness that comes from lifting packages 8 hours a day. "Where's the door?" I showed them. The coal room, the gray steel door, the corroded pull ring. Wade gripped the ring with both hands and pulled. The door didn't move. He braced a foot against the wall and pulled again, and this time, something inside the frame groaned. A sound of metal unseating from metal after decades of stillness. And the door shifted inward a quarter inch. "It opens inward," I said. "Push." He pushed. The groan became a screech that echoed through the coal room and up the stairs, and I thought about the figures on the street and the sound carrying, and I said, "Wait." But Wade was already through the initial resistance. The door swung inward on hinges that sounded like they were being asked to remember a motion they'd performed once, and had spent 60 years forgetting. Behind the door, a concrete landing, then stairs going down. The air that came up was cold and stale and carried a mineral dampness, like the inside of a well. I could see the stairs descending into darkness. Poured concrete treads, steel pipe handrail, both in remarkable condition. Whoever built this had built it to last. I went back to my desk, got the flashlight I kept in my bottom drawer for power outages, and handed it to Wade. He went down first. I went second. Margaret stayed at the top, which I didn't blame her for. 14 steps, a landing. Another steel door, this one ajar by about 2 inches, held open by a chunk of concrete that had fallen from somewhere above. Wade pushed it wide. The flashlight beam swept across a room larger than any space I'd occupied in my professional life. Concrete walls, concrete ceiling, supported by steel I-beams at regular intervals. A floor of poured concrete, cracked in places, but dry. Along the far wall, metal shelving units loaded with cardboard boxes, metal canisters, and what looked like olive-drab military surplus cases. Against the left wall, a long table with folding chairs, a wall-mounted map. Lehigh Valley, the paper yellowed but legible. And a panel of electrical switches labeled in stenciled letters I couldn't read from the doorway. Against the right wall, a bank of cots, folded and stacked, military style, enough for dozens. The war room. Real, intact, waiting for a war that came 62 years late and in the wrong form. "Margaret," I called up the stairs. "Come down." We had been in the war room for approximately 40 minutes when we heard the glass break upstairs. Margaret had come down. The three of us were standing in the middle of that vast, stale room, flashlight beams crossing the darkness, trying to comprehend what we'd found, when the sound reached us. Distant, filtered through 2 floors of concrete and 1 steel door, but unmistakable. Glass. Multiple panes. The front entrance of City Hall. Then, footsteps above us. Not one set, several. Moving across the first floor with that rhythm I was learning to recognize, even through solid structure, even. Unvarying, without the natural syncopation of a living person's stride. Wade moved to the stairwell door and pushed it closed. The latch caught with a solid clank. There was a deadbolt on the inside, a thick steel rod that seated into a bracket in the concrete frame. He threw it. We stood in the dark and listened. The footsteps moved across the first floor. I could track them by the creaking of the old floorboards, which I knew intimately. The loud spot near the stairwell, the quiet zone by the elevator, the particular groan of the section outside the mayor's office where a joist had settled unevenly in 1996 and nobody had fixed it because the repair would require pulling up the new carpet and Colvin had just paid for the carpet. They moved for several minutes. Then they reached the basement stairs. I heard them descending. That even, metronomic pace. And then crossing the basement floor above our heads. I could picture exactly where they were. Past the records room, past the boiler, approaching the coal room. The upper door, the gray steel door Wade had forced open, was still open. We'd left it open. Footsteps on the coal room floor, then on the concrete landing, then on the stairs above us, descending. One set, steady. They reached the lower door. The deadbolt held. The footsteps stopped. For perhaps 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then a pressure on the door. Not a blow, not a push, but a sustained leaning. as if the thing on the other side was testing the resistance of the surface with its body weight. The door didn't move. The deadbolt didn't strain. This was a door built to withstand blast overpressure from a nuclear detonation at distance. It was not going to yield to 170 pounds of standing weight. The pressure stopped. The footsteps ascended, slowly, evenly, back up the stairs and out of the coal room and across the basement and up the main stairs and into the first floor, where they joined the others. I tracked their retreat the same way I'd tracked their approach, by the building's familiar vocabulary of creaks and groans. Margaret was sitting on the floor, her purse still clutched to her chest. Wade was leaning against the door, both palms flat on the steel, as if holding it closed by will, even though the deadbolt had done the work. "We need light," I said. The electrical panel on the far wall had 12 switches. I found them by flashlight and read the stenciled labels: main, ventilation, water pump, emergency lighting, communications, generator, sub-level, and 6 more for specific circuits I'd examine later. I flipped generator, sub-level. Nothing happened. A generator needs fuel, and fuel doesn't last 62 years. Even diesel stabilized with additives degrades past reliable ignition in 10 to 15 years. Whatever had been stored in the fuel tanks below us was sludge. Emergency lighting. I tried it with no expectation, and was rewarded with a click, and then, after a pause that stretched long enough to feel like failure, a dim amber glow from fixtures mounted along the ceiling. Battery backup. The batteries should have been dead decades ago, but these were large format lead-acid units. I could see them on a shelf near the panel. 4 of them, industrial grade, the kind used in telephone switching stations. Someone had installed a trickle charger connected to the building's main electrical system. As long as City Hall had power, these batteries received a maintenance charge. They'd been silently charging for 62 years. The amber light was weak enough to see by, not enough to read comfortably. But after the blackness, it felt like sunrise. The room materialized around us in full, bigger than I'd estimated. The shelving units held hundreds of items. The cot stacks numbered at least 40 units of 3. The map on the wall was not just the Lehigh Valley, but a detailed overlay of Hargrove itself, with concentric circles radiating from a point northwest of town that I recognized as the former Bethlehem Steel Complex. Fallout projection rings labeled with Röntgen values at 24-hour intervals. "There's food here," Wade said. He'd opened one of the olive drab cases. Inside, individually sealed in foil pouches. Survival crackers. He tore one open. The cracker inside was pale, dense, intact. He sniffed it and made a face. "Those are 60 years old," I said. "They're sealed." "Sealed doesn't mean safe." He bit into it anyway. Chewed, swallowed. "Tastes like drywall. But it's food." I opened another case. Canned water. Yes, canned in steel cans marked drinking water, potable, 12 ounces, Department of Defense, 1962. I'd read about these. The cans were lacquer-lined and theoretically shelf-stable for decades, if undamaged. I shook one. Liquid inside. No bulging, no corrosion on the seam. I opened it with the P38 can opener attached to the case by a bead chain. The water inside was clear, odorless. I poured a small amount into my palm. It looked fine. It could also be a slow-acting source of lead or bacterial contamination that would manifest in 12 hours. I set it aside. "We need to find the actual water supply," I said. "The plans show a well tap on the utility level. If it's functional, it would draw from groundwater, same aquifer as the city wells. Where's the utility level?" I pointed to the floor. "Below us. There should be an access somewhere in this room." We searched. The access was a hatch in the southwest corner, a steel plate with a recessed handle bolted to the floor. The bolts were frozen with corrosion. Wade found a wrench in a toolkit mounted on the wall. A military-issue toolkit, complete, organized. each tool silhouetted on a pegboard, like evidence of someone's meticulous preparation for an emergency they didn't live to see. He worked the bolts free. We lifted the hatch. More stairs, more darkness. I was developing a relationship with descent that I hadn't asked for. The utility level was smaller, lower ceilinged, and colder. The air had a different quality. Not just stale, but pressurized. Dense, carrying the weight of the earth above it. I could feel it in my sinuses. The generator was a diesel unit, military specification, bolted to a concrete pad with vibration dampeners that had deteriorated into crumbled rubber. The fuel tank was a 500-gallon steel cylinder, and when I tapped it with the wrench, it sounded half full, which meant approximately 250 gallons of diesel that had been sitting since 1962. Useless for the generator. Potentially useful as a fuel source if we could filter it. But I didn't know enough about diesel mechanics to evaluate that, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The water system was more promising. A hand-operated pump. Cast iron, floor-mounted, with a lever handle. Connected to a pipe that descended into the floor. A well tap, drawing from whatever depth the original engineers had drilled to reach the aquifer. I worked the handle. It resisted, then moved, then resisted again. I put my weight into it, cycling the lever up and down, and after about 30 strokes, water began to spit from the outlet pipe. Brown at first, then rust-colored, then clearing to something that looked drinkable. I pumped a full gallon into a bucket that had been stored beside the pump. The water was cold, faintly mineral, with no sulfur smell. It looked clear when held up to my flashlight. Without testing, I couldn't confirm it was safe. But a sealed well in a limestone aquifer, undisturbed for 60 years, drawing from below the water table. The odds were reasonable. Better than the canned water. Better than nothing. "We can survive down here," I said to Wade, who had followed me to the utility level while Margaret stayed above with the emergency lights. "For how long?" I thought about it honestly. Water, yes, if the well held. Food. The survival crackers and canned goods were a gamble, but some fraction of them were probably edible. Ventilation was the problem. The plans showed a mechanical ventilation system, drawing surface air through filtered intakes. Without the generator, there was no powered ventilation. The war room's volume, roughly 40 by 60 by 10 feet, or 24,000 cubic feet, would support 3 people for a limited time on passive air exchange through the stairwell and any gaps in the structure. But carbon dioxide buildup would become dangerous within days if we sealed ourselves in completely. "Days," I said. "Maybe a week if we manage the air." And then? I pointed to the east wall of the utility level. According to the blueprints, the egress tunnel started here, a horizontal shaft running 847 feet south-southeast, with surface exit at Riverside Park. There was a door in the east wall, another steel door, identical to the others. I pulled the handle. It opened more easily than I expected. The hinges were better protected down here, sealed from moisture by the depth and the concrete. Behind it, the flashlight showed a tunnel, concrete-lined, 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, receding into perfect blackness. "That goes to Riverside Park," I said. "You're sure?" "The plans say it does. Have you been in it?" "I found these plans 3 hours ago." Wade looked at the tunnel. He looked at me. "You found all of this 3 hours ago?" "Yes." "And you've worked upstairs for 22 years. He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Nobody told you. Nobody knew. Or if they knew, they didn't consider it relevant to the records clerk." He stared at me for a moment with an expression I wasn't used to receiving. Not pity, not amusement, but a kind of recalibration, as if the category he'd filed me in no longer applied. We went back up. Margaret had opened several more cases and arranged their contents on the long table with the precision of someone who managed a filing system of her own. The front desk at City Hall, where every form was in its slot and every pen cup was full and the butterscotch bowl was never empty. She'd found more crackers, canned water, a medical kit with supplies that were mostly expired but included sealed iodine, gauze, and a bottle of aspirin that looked structurally sound. She'd also found blankets, wool, military issue, mothballed in sealed plastic that had held. "I called Daryl again," she said. "No signal down here." Of course not. We were 26 feet below grade, encased in reinforced concrete. No signal was getting in or out. "Eli," I said. And the name came out before I could shape it into a full sentence. Margaret understood. "We'll figure it out," she said. The same thing people say when they can't figure it out and need the sentence to exist as furniture in the room. I spread the blueprints on the table. The three of us looked at them under the amber light. I walked them through what I understood: the war room, the utility level, the generator, the well, the ventilation problem, the tunnel. I pointed to each element on the drawings and matched it to what we'd found. Sheet 7 showed the war room layout. Sheet 9 showed the utility level. Sheet 11 showed the tunnel in cross-section. Sheet 14, the one that should have shown the tunnel's terminus, its surface exit structure at Riverside Park, was still missing. "So we don't know what's at the other end," Wade said. "We know what the plans intended. We don't know what was built. That's a big difference." Yes. By noon, we had a rhythm, and the rhythm was built on things I knew how to do: inventory, organization, record-keeping. The quiet, invisible labor of making chaos legible. I'd done it for 22 years with property records and deed books and zoning files. And now I did it with 60-year-old survival provisions and a space I was learning by touch and measurement, the way I'd learned the records room, by being the person who stayed long enough to understand where everything was. The food inventory took 2 hours. 48 cases of survival crackers, each containing 24 foil pouches. 20 cases of canned water, each containing 48 12-ounce cans. 12 cases of canned rations, a meat and vegetable stew that, when I opened a sample can, had separated into a layer of congealed fat over a dense brown mass that smelled aggressively of salt and nothing else. The crackers were the safest bet. The canned water was the unknown. Some cans showed micro-corrosion on the seams, others were pristine. I sorted them into 3 categories: intact, questionable, and compromised. The intact pile numbered about 400 cans. 400 12-ounce cans, 3 people. That was roughly 16 gallons, or 5 1/3 gallons per person, which at a minimum survival consumption of half a gallon per day meant about 10 days each if the well failed. The well wouldn't fail, probably. The aquifer beneath Hargrove was part of the Valley Creek watershed, fed by the Lehigh River system, and unless something had fundamentally altered the water table in 60 years, which development certainly could have, the pump should draw indefinitely. But I'm a records clerk, not a hydrologist. And should is a word I've learned to distrust. I wrote all of this down, not in a field journal, not in an artist's notebook. On a yellow legal pad I'd grabbed from my desk upstairs before the stairwell door was sealed. I wrote in the same hand I used for filing annotations: small, precise, datable. I listed quantities, locations, conditions. I noted the battery levels of the emergency lighting, estimating remaining life at approximately 72 hours based on draw rate and the likely amp-hour capacity of 30-year-old lead-acid cells that had been on trickle charge. I noted the ambient temperature, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with below-grade conditions in this region. Comfortable enough, but cold over time without activity. Wade checked the upper stairwell door periodically. He'd press his ear to the steel and listen. Twice during the afternoon, he reported footsteps in the basement above us. Once he reported what he described as a lot of them, like a group moving together, which crossed the basement and ascended to the first floor and didn't return. Margaret organized the medical supplies and the blankets and set up 3 cots in the far corner of the war room, spacing them the way I'd seen hospital beds arranged. Close enough for companionship, far enough for the fiction of privacy. She made the beds with military blankets, tucking the corners. The domestic precision of it was either comforting or devastating, depending on when I looked at it. I thought about Eli constantly, not in sustained waves, but in jabs. Moments where I'd be counting canned water and his face would appear in the arithmetic. Eli, who was 17. Eli, who never checked his phone, despite having it fused to his hand. Eli, who might be locked in a classroom right now, or might be on the street, or might be. And I'd stop the thought there, because stopping it was the only way to keep counting. At 3 in the afternoon, someone tried the upper door, not the dead, a person. Knocking, the specific rhythm of a human hand hitting steel. Irregular, urgent, with pauses between bursts that communicated desperation more clearly than any shouting could. Then shouting. A man's voice, muffled through the door and the concrete. Is anyone down there? I can see the door's been opened. Please. Wade looked at me. Margaret looked at me. This was the moment. The first one. When I realized that my knowledge of this space had made me, without anyone saying so, the person who decided things. If we open that door, I said, anything on the basement level can come down. He's alive, Margaret said. We don't know who else is up there. He's alive, Ruth. I looked at the deadbolt, at the steel door that had held against the leaning weight of something dead, at the stairs beyond it that led up to a basement that was now connected through the coal room and the open upper door to a building whose first floor had been breached. Wade, I said, if we open it fast. He comes through fast, and we close it immediately. Wade nodded. He positioned himself at the deadbolt. I stood 3 steps back with the heaviest thing I could find. A fire extinguisher from the wall mount, expired in 1983, but still a 6-pound steel cylinder. Wade through the deadbolt, pulled the door open. A man half fell down the stairs. Thin, mid-30s, wearing a polo shirt with the logo of Hargrove Savings Bank, khakis, no shoes. He hit the landing and Wade slammed the door and shot the deadbolt before I could register whether anything had followed. Nothing had. The stairwell was clear. But through the closing door, I'd seen the coal room. And in the coal room, visible for the half-second the door was open, I'd seen the upper door, the gray steel door to the regular basement. And it was no longer open. It was closed. Someone had closed it behind this man, or had closed it before this man found his way down. Either way, the upper door was shut, and we were sealed. His name was Pierce Langley. He was a loan officer at Hargrove Savings, 2 buildings east of City Hall on Commerce. He'd been in the bank when the windows went. He'd hidden in the vault. A reasonable choice. For over 5 hours before the sound above stopped and he'd risked moving. He'd crossed Commerce Street barefoot because he'd removed his shoes to move quietly. He'd entered City Hall through the broken front doors, found the basement, found the coal room, found the stairs. The upper door was open when I came through, he said. He was shaking a full-body tremor, sustained, like a plucked string. I closed it behind me. I thought that was smart, to close it. You closed it, I said. Yes. Is there a lock on the other side? I don't. I didn't check. I closed my eyes. The upper door had a keyhole and a pull ring on the basement side. Olmsted's plans showed a matching lock mechanism on the stairwell side. If Pierce had simply pulled it shut, it might have latched. If there was a gravity latch, it was sealed. If there wasn't, it was resting in the frame, closable from above, openable from above. I need to check, I said. Ruth, Margaret said. If that door isn't locked, anything, that finds it can open it and come down to our door. Our door holds. I trust our door. But I'd rather know what's between us and the surface. Wade went with me. We opened the lower door quietly, climbed the stairs to the landing. The upper door was closed. I tried the pull ring. It held. Something had caught in the frame. Not a deadbolt, not a formal lock. But the latch mechanism had engaged when Pierce pulled it shut. Dumb luck. I pressed my ear to the steel. Silence from the basement, which meant silence or absence. I couldn't tell the difference, and the difference was everything. The batteries died at 11 p.m. I'd estimated 72 hours. I got 16. The trickle charger had maintained them for decades, but the capacity of a lead-acid battery degrades with age, and what reads as charged on a resting cell drains fast under actual load. The amber lights flickered, dimmed, brightened briefly, a false hope, and went out. The war room went black. Not dim, not shadowed. Black, the way only a sealed underground space can be black. Absolute, total, without gradient or reference. I couldn't see my hand. I couldn't see the wall. I couldn't see the 3 people who I knew were within 15 feet of me because I could hear their breathing, each a distinct rhythm, Wade's slow and controlled. Margaret's shallow and fast. Pierce's irregular, catching on something in his throat. I turned on my flashlight. One flashlight, standard AA batteries, maybe 8 hours of continuous use. We had no replacements. Turn it off, Wade said. Save it. Not yet. I found the legal pad. I found the pen. In the flashlight beam I wrote, 11:07 p.m., batteries dead. 1 flashlight remaining. Estimate 8 hours. Need alternative. Then I turned it off. The dark was not something I got used to. It was something I endured. The way you endure a sound that won't stop or a weight that won't lift. I'd spent 22 years in a basement with fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. And even that dim, institutional illumination had been a kind of companionship. This was its opposite. This was the building swallowing us. Margaret spoke first. I can't do this. You can. Ruth, I can't breathe. You're breathing. I can hear you. It feels like... I know what it feels like. It feels like the room is smaller than it is. It's not. It's 40 by 60 feet. We have 24,000 cubic feet of air. You're fine. I was guessing about the air. The ventilation system was dead without the generator, and our only air exchange was whatever seeped through the stairwell doors and the building's structural gaps. 3 people in an unventilated sealed space consume the oxygen at a rate that depends on activity level, body mass, and the starting O2 concentration. At rest, a person uses roughly 0.5 cubic feet of oxygen per hour. Our space held approximately 5,040 cubic feet of oxygen at standard concentration. 3 people at rest. 1.5 cubic feet per hour. Theoretical breathable air. Roughly 140 days before oxygen dropped to dangerous levels, assuming perfect sealing and no CO2 effects. But CO2 would become a problem much sooner. At rest, each person exhales about 0.7 cubic feet of CO2 per hour. In a sealed space, CO2 concentration reaches dangerous levels. Headaches, impaired judgment. At about 3%. In 24,000 cubic feet, that's 720 cubic feet of CO2. At 2.1 cubic feet per hour from 3 people, we'd hit that threshold in about 343 hours, or roughly 14 days. 14 breathable air, if the space was truly sealed, which it wasn't. The stairwell represented a significant volume extension, and the building above, even damaged, would leak. But I didn't know how to calculate air exchange through 2 closed steel doors and a building full of the dead, so 14 days was my working number, and I wrote it on the legal pad in the dark, by feel, which meant it was probably illegible. But the act of writing it made it real. 14 days, I said aloud. What? Pierce's voice from the dark. Air. We have about 14 days of breathable air, conservatively. Water is indefinite if the well holds. Food is provisional. The crackers are safe. Everything else is a risk. 14 days, Pierce repeated. That's if we stay sealed. If we open the stairwell doors to increase air exchange, we extend it significantly but compromise security. So leave the doors open, he said. The upper door is the only thing between us and the basement. The lower door is the only thing between us and the stairwell. If something comes down, so we take turns. Open the doors during the day when we're awake and can close them fast. Seal at night. It wasn't a bad idea. It was the kind of practical thinking that emerges when fear meets engineering, and I noted it on the pad. What I did not note, what I did not say, was the other calculation I was running. The egress tunnel, 847 feet to Riverside Park. An exit, a way out that bypassed the building above us entirely, emerging 3 blocks south in open ground near the river. If it was complete, if it was passable, if the 62 years since its construction hadn't filled it with water or collapse or the geological indifference of a hillside that didn't know it was supposed to contain a tunnel. Sheet 14 was missing. The sheet that would have shown the tunnel's terminus. The sheet that would have told me whether Olmsted's engineers had finished what they started. I hadn't gone into the tunnel yet. I'd shone the flashlight into its opening on the utility level and seen concrete walls receding into darkness, intact for as far as the beam carried. But I hadn't entered it. I hadn't walked it. I didn't know what was at the other end. And I was afraid that if I walked it and found it blocked, found it collapsed, found it ending in raw earth and failed ambition, the knowledge would be worse than the uncertainty, because right now the tunnel was a possibility, an exit on paper, a door marked on a blueprint by a man who believed in preparation. If I checked and it was real, we had a way out. If I checked and it wasn't, we had a sealed concrete box with 14 days of air and a prayer. I chose not to check, not yet. I told myself I was being strategic, that the flashlight needed to be conserved, that the tunnel could wait until morning, that we should rest first. The truth was simpler. I was a records clerk. I was good at filing information, categorizing it, preserving it. I was not good at walking into dark tunnels that might end in nothing. I had never been asked to be that person, and becoming that person in a single day required something I wasn't sure I had. So I sat in the dark with 3 strangers and listened to them breathe and counted the hours by my watch and waited for the courage to go looking for a door that might not exist. Margaret died at 4:17 in the morning. Not violently, not from the dead, not from exposure, not from anything dramatic. She died of a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, in her sleep, on a military cot, under a wool blanket, in a room she'd been in for less than 20 hours. I woke to Wade shaking my shoulder. "Ruth, something's wrong with Margaret." His voice was flat, in the way voices get when the person speaking has already processed what they're telling you and has passed the emotional part and into the procedural. I turned on the flashlight. Margaret was on her cot, on her back, one hand still resting on her purse. Her eyes were closed. Her face held an expression of mild concentration, as if she'd been working on a problem and had paused to consider. Her chest was not moving. Her skin, in the flashlight beam, had a waxy quality that living skin does not have. Yolanda checked for a pulse. I don't know why I typed Yolanda. Wade. Wade checked for a pulse. He pressed 2 fingers under her jaw, moved them, pressed again, looked at me, and shook his head. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know. I woke up and she was... cold isn't the right word. She wasn't warm. The room was 58 degrees. A body cools at roughly 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per hour in still air at that temperature. If she was noticeably cool to the touch, she'd been dead for at least 2 hours. Since 2-something in the morning. While we slept. While I was filing her in my mind under alive, accounted for, cot 3. Pierce was sitting up on his cot, blanket pulled to his chin, looking at Margaret's body with an expression I recognized from the bank logo on his shirt, the measured composure of someone trained to deliver bad news about money. Applied here to a situation that had nothing to do with money and for which no training applied. "We need to move her," he said. "Not yet," I said. "Ruth, what if she wasn't, she had a heart attack. There's no reason to think. We don't know how it works. He was right. We didn't know how it worked. We'd seen bite victims turn, per what fragmentary information we had, but we didn't know if death alone was enough. If the mechanism was the bite, Margaret was safe. If the mechanism was death, any death. Then the woman I'd worked across the hall from for 14 years was about to sit up on that cot and become something I couldn't file under any category I knew. We waited. I timed it on my watch. We waited 45 minutes, the three of us in the flashlight beam, watching Margaret's body for any movement, any twitch, any resumption of the mechanical breathing I'd heard described. Nothing. She remained still. She remained dead. She remained Margaret, which was both a relief and a grief so specific it felt medical. An excision. A thing cut cleanly from the living tissue of what was left of my normal life. We wrapped her in her blanket. We carried her to the utility level and placed her in the far corner, away from the well pump, away from the tunnel entrance. I folded her hands over her purse because she would have wanted it, and because it was the last thing I could do for her that matched anything I understood about who she had been. Back in the war room, the three of us stood in the dark. I'd turned off the flashlight to preserve it. And the silence was different now. Not the silence of waiting, the silence of three people who'd become two people and were aware of the arithmetic. "The tunnel," I said. "What about it?" "Wait, I need to check it. If it goes through, it's our exit. If it doesn't, we need to know. Go now." "Yes, before the flashlight dies." "Pierce, I'll go with you." "No, I need you and Wade here. If something happens to me in the tunnel, you need to be able to seal the utility hatch and survive on the well and the rations until something changes." "Till what changes?" "I don't know. But someone should be alive down here." Wade met my eyes in the flashlight glow. He'd been quiet since Margaret. Not withdrawn. Processing. Running calculations of his own. "How long before we come looking for you?" he asked. "Give me 2 hours. If I'm not back, close the hatch." "Ruth?" 2 hours. 847 feet. I keep coming back to that number because it is precise in the way that only an engineer's number can be, and because precision was the only comfort available to me in that tunnel. The distance from the utility level door to the planned surface exit was 847 feet. That's approximately 282 yards, or just over 2.5 football fields, or about the distance from my desk in the City Hall basement to the coffee shop on 4th Street, where I bought a medium drip every morning for 22 years. I'd walked 847 feet 10,000 times in my life without thinking about it. I had never walked 847 feet underground, alone, with a flashlight losing its charge, and a dead colleague on the floor behind me, and a city full of the reanimated dead above me. The tunnel was well built for its first 400 feet. Concrete walls, concrete ceiling, poured in sections, with visible seam lines. The floor was slightly graded, a gentle downward slope, maybe 2 degrees, designed for water drainage toward a sump that I passed at around the 200-foot mark, a shallow depression in the floor with a rusted grate over a drain pipe. The air was cold and still and tasted of calcium and time. My footsteps echoed in a way that gave the tunnel a sonic depth, a sense of extending beyond what I could see. I counted steps. Average stride, roughly 2.5 feet. That meant approximately 339 steps to cover the distance. I counted because counting is what I do. I file, I measure, I note. At step 180, roughly 450 feet, the concrete stopped. Not abruptly. The poured walls tapered into a section where the concrete gave way to shotcrete, a rougher, spray-applied surface, the kind used in mining and preliminary excavation. The finish was uneven, with exposed aggregate and the occasional void. The ceiling lowered by about 6 inches. The floor went from smooth concrete to compacted gravel over raw earth. The tunnel had transitioned from finished infrastructure to active construction zone, frozen in place at the moment the money ran out or the priority changed, or someone in Harrisburg decided the Russians weren't coming after all. At step 230, about 575 feet, the shotcrete ended. Beyond it, the tunnel was raw. Unlined earth and rock, supported by timber framing at irregular intervals. The timbers were old-growth hardwood, probably oak, and they had held for 60 years, which meant either the geology was stable, or I was extremely lucky and about to discover which. The flashlight was dimming, not dramatically, a gradual reduction in the beam's throw, the circle of light on the tunnel wall contracting from 6 feet to 4 to 3. The batteries were entering their final decline. I had maybe an hour of usable light, and I was more than halfway through the tunnel, and the tunnel was getting worse. And the sensible thing, the records clerk thing, was to turn around and report what I'd found and wait. I kept going. At step 290, roughly 725 feet, the timber framing stopped. The tunnel continued as an unlined bore through dense clay and shale, and I could see tool marks on the walls. The scarring of manual excavation, pick and shovel, not machine cut. Someone had dug this last section by hand. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck, 5 feet at most, and the walls were close, 3 feet apart. And the air was thick and mineral, and I was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the weight of all the earth above me, 38 feet of it, pressing down through clay and rock and root onto a tube of empty space that existed only because a man named Olmsted had drawn a line on a piece of paper in 1962. At step 322, the tunnel ended. A wall of packed earth, dense, dark, striated with layers of clay and decomposed shale. Intact, unbroken, the tunnel simply stopped, as if the diggers had set down their tools one afternoon and walked back to the surface and never returned. I pressed my palm against the earth wall. It was cool and slightly damp and absolutely solid. I pushed. It didn't give. I knocked on it with my knuckles, the way you'd test a wall for hollow space behind it, and it sounded dead. No resonance, no void beyond. I stood there with my dimming flashlight and my palm against the end of an unfinished tunnel, and I did the math. 847 feet planned. 322 steps at 2.5 feet was 805 feet. That left 42 feet unexcavated. 42 feet of earth between me and the surface exit at Riverside Park. 42 feet that Olmsted's crew had never dug. I turned off the flashlight. The dark was absolute. I stood in it and pressed my hand against the wall and felt the weight of the earth above me and the building behind me and the bodies inside it, living and dead and otherwise. And I thought about Eli. I thought about the text I'd sent. "Where are you? Stay inside. Call me." That had been delivered and not answered. I thought about the fact that I was 805 feet from safety in one direction and 26 feet below a city that had stopped being a city in the space of a morning. And the only thing between me and an exit was 42 feet of clay that a government engineer had decided wasn't worth finishing. I turned the flashlight back on. I looked at the wall. I looked at the tool marks on the walls behind me. The pick scars, the shovel scrapes, the evidence of manual labor performed by people who had done this once before, in this exact tunnel, with hand tools, on government wages, in 1962. And then I went back, not because I'd given up, because I'd seen something on the utility level that I needed. The military toolkit on the wall, the one with the wrench Wade had used on the hatch bolts. It also held a folding entrenching tool, a small military shovel with a pick point on one side, and a mattock. And, in the provisions cases, I'd noticed without registering it, 2 more entrenching tools, still in their canvas sheaths, packed as part of the shelter's standard equipment. 3 shovels, 42 feet of clay and shale, and somewhere above that clay, at the surface, a park on the bank of a river where the light was still falling even if nobody was there to see it. I told them. I stood in the war room with the dimming flashlight and the legal pad, and I told Wade and Pierce what I'd found. 805 feet of tunnel, passable. 42 feet of earth, unexcavated. 3 entrenching tools. An estimate. 42 feet, Pierce said. How long would that take? I don't know. The existing tunnel was hand-dug. The clay is dense but workable. One person with an entrenching tool in a space 3 feet wide, rotating with 2 others. If we work in shifts, continuously, we might clear a foot per hour. Maybe more if the material loosens near the surface. Maybe less if we hit rock. 42 hours, Wade said. He'd done the multiplication before I finished the sentence. At least. Maybe 60. And we have to move the spoil. The excavated material. Back behind us in the tunnel. There's no room to pile it at the face. Can we dump it in the utility level? Some. But we'll be hauling buckets back 800 feet for every load. Wade looked at Pierce. Pierce looked at his hands. Soft hands. Loan officer hands. Scratched from his barefoot crossing of Commerce Street, but otherwise unmarked by physical labor. He flexed his fingers and didn't say anything. There's something else, I said. The upper door. The one Pierce closed. What about it? If we're going to dig for 2 days, we need air. The war room is sealed. The stairwell extends to the upper door, which opens into the coal room, which opens into the basement, which opens into the building. If we open both stairwell doors, we get passive air exchange from the entire building volume. Enough to work indefinitely. You want to open the door to the basement, Pierce said. I want to open the door to the stairwell. The upper door, the one you closed, stays shut. It's the barrier. It's not locked. It latched when you pulled it. A latch isn't a lock. He was right. A gravity latch, if that's what it was, could be opened by pulling from the other side. If anything on the basement level found that door and pulled the ring, it would open, and then the stairwell would be a direct passage from the basement to our door. This was the second decision that became mine, because nobody else had the blueprints. I could keep both doors sealed and protect the war room absolutely, at the cost of breathable air. We'd have 14 days of sealed air, minus what we'd already consumed. Call it 12 days. And if the digging took 60 hours, that was only 2.5 days of work. We could dig in sealed conditions. It would be uncomfortable. O2 buildup would cause headaches, fatigue, impaired judgment. But it was survivable. Or I could open the lower door to extend our air supply, accepting the risk that the upper door might not hold. Better air, better working conditions. More time if the digging took longer than estimated. But a direct physical connection to everything above us, separated by a latch I hadn't tested and couldn't see. We dig sealed, I said. We keep both doors locked. We manage the air. You just said we'd have headaches, and I said we'd survive. Comfort isn't the priority. Wade nodded. Pierce opened his mouth, closed it, nodded. I handed out the entrenching tools. They were olive drab, wooden-handled, the blades pitted with surface rust, but structurally sound. I showed them how to unfold the blade and lock it. I showed them the pick point on the reverse side. We went down to the utility level, past Margaret's blanket-wrapped body in the corner, past the dead generator, past the hand pump, to the tunnel entrance. I'll take first shift, I said. 1 hour on, 2 hours rest. We rotate continuously. Spoil goes into the buckets. I'd found 2 galvanized steel buckets in the utility level, and gets hauled back to the utility level on each rest rotation. Questions? Wade picked up a bucket. Lead the way. I walked 805 feet into the earth for the second time that day. This time with 2 men behind me and a shovel in my hand, and a flashlight that was going to die within the hour. When it died, we'd work in the dark. I'd work by feel, by the sound of the blade hitting clay, by the texture of the spoil in my hands, by counting strokes. The flashlight lasted 19 more minutes. Its death was gradual. A filament color shift from white to amber to a deep, sickly orange. And then nothing. The last thing I saw by its light was the wall of earth at the end of the tunnel, and the first mark of my entrenching tool in its surface. A shallow gash in the clay that looked, in the dying light, like a wound. Then dark, total dark. And the sound of my own breathing, and the blade, and the earth giving way. A little at a time. And behind me the sound of Wade filling a bucket with loose clay, and behind him the sound of Pierce dragging a full bucket back down the tunnel, and the shuffling rhythm of 3 people performing manual labor in complete darkness, 750 feet from the nearest dead body and 805 feet from the nearest living one, which was themselves. I dug. I'm going to tell you about digging for 49 hours, because you need to understand what it costs to move 42 feet of earth with hand tools in a space you can't stand up in and can't see. The first shift was the hardest because I didn't know the material yet. The clay at the tunnel face was dense, not rock hard but resistant, the consistency of cold modeling clay, the kind I used to buy in 50-pound blocks for the... No, that's someone else's reference. The clay required the pick point to break up and the blade to scoop. Each stroke of the pick loosened maybe 2 pounds of material. Each scoop of the blade filled a quarter of a bucket. Each bucket weighed roughly 35 pounds full. Each bucket had to travel 805 feet back to the utility level. We had 2 buckets. The system was: 1 person digs, 1 person fills and hauls, 1 person rests. My first shift produced approximately 8 inches of penetration into the face. The tunnel was 3 feet wide and 5 feet high at the digging face. I was excavating a cross-section of 15 square feet. 8 inches of depth across 15 square feet is 10 cubic feet of material, roughly 900 pounds of clay and shale. Moved 800 feet by hand, 35 pounds at a time. 26 trips. Wade's first shift produced 10 inches. He was stronger, younger, mid-30s. Daily physical labor as a FedEx driver. Upper body conditioned for lifting 50-pound packages. He attacked the face with a methodical fury that I could hear in the dark. The rhythmic impact of the pick, the scrape of the blade, the thud of clay hitting the bucket. He didn't speak during his shifts. The work consumed him. Pierce produced 6 inches. He was not built for this. His hands blistered within the first 20 minutes. I could hear him hissing through his teeth, a sound I learned to associate with the specific pain of raw skin gripping a wooden handle. By the end of his first shift, his palms were bleeding. I wrapped them with gauze from the medical kit, which used half our supply, and he went back in for his second shift without being asked. We worked in cycles, 1 hour on, 2 off. The person resting lay on the tunnel floor. There was no room to sit upright, and tried to sleep, which was possible for about 40 minutes at a stretch before the cold and the discomfort and the sound of digging woke you. We ate crackers during rest periods. We drank well water that we'd pumped and carried in before starting. I tracked time on my watch and shift changes on the legal pad, writing by feel, the letters probably overlapping, probably illegible, but the act of recording it maintaining a thread of order in a situation that had none. By the 12-hour mark, roughly 1 a.m. on April 11th, we had penetrated 4 feet, 38 feet remaining. The material had changed, the dense clay giving way to a mixed stratum of clay and decomposed shale that was easier to pick but harder to scoop, crumbling into fragments that had to be gathered by hand. My shoulders ached from the picking motion, a deep bruise-like pain that radiated from the deltoids to the base of my neck. My hands were raw, but not blistered. 22 years of handling file folders and deed books had given me soft skin, but also a certain toughness in the fingertips that I hadn't appreciated until now. By the 24-hour mark, 1 p.m. on April 11th, we had penetrated 11 feet. The air at the digging face was thick and warm, heated by our bodies and the exertion, and I could feel the CO2 in it, a heaviness, a weight in each breath that made the next breath feel like it wasn't enough. We were working in a sealed tunnel inside a sealed room inside a sealed building, and every cubic foot of carbon dioxide we exhaled was staying with us. Headache, Wade reported during a shift change. Not a complaint, an observation. He'd been a delivery driver who dealt in package tracking numbers and route optimization, and he approached his own physical symptoms with the same data-driven flatness. Me too, I said. It's the CO2. Open the doors? Not yet. By the 36-hour mark, 1 a.m. on April 12th, we had penetrated 23 feet, 19 feet remaining. The material had changed again. Less clay, more shale, harder, slower going. My production per shift had dropped from 8 inches to 5. Wade's from 10 to 7. Pierce was averaging 4. His wrapped hands reopening with each shift, the gauze soaked through and useless. His grip on the handle maintained by will, and by the fact that the alternative to digging was sitting in the dark and counting breaths. The headaches were constant now. Not sharp, dull, pervasive, like wearing a hat that was too tight. Thinking required deliberate effort. I found myself losing count of strokes and having to restart. I found myself resting longer between swings, the pick hanging at my side, my breath loud in the enclosed space. The air was bad. I knew it was bad. I was choosing to continue because the math said we'd break through before it killed us, and the math was all I had. At the 40-hour mark, Pierce collapsed during his shift. Not dramatically. He simply stopped digging and sat down against the tunnel wall. And when Wade crawled forward to check on him, Pierce said, in a voice that was remarkably calm, "I can't feel my fingers." We pulled him back to the war room. The air there was better. The larger volume diluted the CO2, and within 20 minutes, his fingers were working again, and the grayness in his face had receded. But he couldn't go back into the tunnel. His hands were destroyed. The blisters had opened. The raw tissue beneath had cracked, and every grip on the handle reopened the wounds. He was bleeding through the last of the gauze. 2 diggers, 19 feet. Wade and I went back in. We shortened the shifts to 45 minutes and increased the rest to 90. The rest periods were spent lying on the tunnel floor in the dark, breathing air that tasted like metal and earth and our own exhalation. And I thought about Eli. And I thought about Margaret. And I thought about the 1962 plans and the missing sheet 14. And I wondered whether Olmsted had known his tunnel was unfinished. Whether there was a report somewhere, in a file cabinet in Harrisburg, documenting the project's abandonment, whether it had been a budget decision, whether someone had written a memo, the kind I spent my career handling, explaining why 42 feet of digging wasn't worth the cost. 42 feet, the distance from my desk to the supply closet, the distance from the front door to the parking lot, the distance that a government bureaucracy had decided was not important enough to close. At the 49th hour, approximately 2 p.m. on April 12th, I was on the face, picking at a seam of shale that had been resisting for 3 shifts, when the pick broke through into a void. Not open air, not the surface. A pocket. A natural cavity in the shale, maybe 6 inches across. The kind of void that forms when water dissolves limestone inclusions over centuries. The pick went in and met no resistance, and my arm followed, and the sudden lack of impact sent me off balance, pitching forward into the face. I pulled the pick out. I pressed my face to the hole. The air that came through was different. Not the stale, warm, CO2-heavy air of the tunnel. Not fresh, exactly, but cooler, moving, carrying a faint dampness that smelled like rain. Wait. What? There's air coming through. He crawled forward. I guided his hand to the hole. He held his palm over it. It's moving, he said. There's air on the other side. How far are we? I checked the legal pad. My tallies, scrawled in the dark, were a mess. But I'd been rigorous about the counting. 23 feet at the 36-hour mark. 5.5 additional feet in the following 13 hours. We were at approximately 28.5 feet of penetration. That left 13.5 feet to the surface. 13.5 feet, with air coming through. which meant the material above us was not solid. It was fractured, permeable, loosened by root action or water infiltration or 60 years of freeze-thaw cycles working on whatever cap the tunnel's intended exit would have had. I attacked the void with a pick. The shale around it crumbled more easily than anything I'd hit in the last 10 hours, breaking into plates that fell away in sheets. Behind the shale was soil. Real soil, dark, root-threaded, smelling of organic decay and moisture. Topsoil. We were close enough to the surface that the earth had been colonized by plants. I dug faster. The entrenching tool blade cut through soil like it was designed to. Which it was. It was a shovel. This was what shovels were for. And the material came away in satisfying clumps that I pushed behind me for Wade to bucket. The ceiling of the excavation began to drop as I dug upward, angling the shaft toward the surface, and I was on my knees and then on my stomach, reaching above my head to pull earth down onto my face and chest. And the air was getting better with every inch, cooler, wetter, carrying the smell of April rain and river mud and growing things. At approximately 3 feet from what I estimated was the surface, I hit roots, not fine hair roots, structural roots, thick as my wrist, or woven through the soil in a dense mat. Oak or sycamore, the kind of deep-rooted hardwoods that grow in river bottomland. I hacked at them with the pick point, which was not designed for cutting wood, and the roots splintered and tore, and the effort was enormous. Each root requiring 30 or 40 blows to sever. And my arms were beyond pain, operating in a territory past pain, where the nerves had simply given up reporting, and the muscles moved on the memory of a command I'd stopped consciously giving. 2 feet. The soil was loose and wet. Water was seeping in. Groundwater from the surface, filtering through the disturbed earth. It ran down my arms and into my sleeves. And it was cold, and it was the most real thing I'd felt in 2 days. 1 foot, I could feel the texture of the soil changing, finer, more organic, mixed with leaf litter and the crumbled remnants of what might have been a concrete cap that had deteriorated to rubble. I punched the entrenching tool blade upward, straight up, a jabbing thrust, and it sank to the handle. And when I pulled it out, the hole admitted a shaft of gray light, gray, overcast. The light of an April afternoon filtered through cloud cover. It entered the tunnel through a hole, no bigger than my fist, and it fell on my face and my hands, and the dark earth around me. And I closed my eyes, because the brightness, which was not bright at all, which was the dimmest, most diffuse light imaginable, was overwhelming after 2 days in the dark. I widened the hole, pulled earth down, pushed debris back, widened it again. The hole became a gap, the gap became a shaft, and then I pushed my head through and I was looking at grass. Wet grass, April grass, growing in the mowed lawn of Riverside Park, 3 blocks south of City Hall, on the bank of the Lehigh River. It was raining. The rain fell on my face and into my eyes and my mouth. And I opened my mouth and let it in, and the taste of it was clean and mineral, and alive in a way that the well water had not been. I pulled myself out. The exit point was on a slight slope, partially hidden by a stand of river birch, 10 feet from the park's walking path. I sat on the wet grass and looked at the sky and the river and the empty park and the town beyond it. Hargrove, my town. 22 years of my life, and I could see from here what had happened to it. Cars stopped in the streets, windows broken. No smoke, no fire, no dramatic destruction, just absence. The specific emptiness of a place that still looked like itself, but no longer was. And figures, moving, on Bridge Street, 2 blocks north. 3 of them, walking east, that gait, that pace. I slid back into the hole, back into the tunnel, back into the dark, and I crawled the 805 feet to the utility level and told Wade and Pierce what I'd found. "It's open," I said. "The tunnel goes to the surface. Riverside Park. It's raining." Pierce started crying, not sobbing. A quiet, sustained leak of tears that he made no effort to stop or explain. Wade put his hand on the wall and leaned there, and I watched his shoulders move in a way that might have been breathing or might have been something else. "We can go," I said, "but we need to decide about the door." "What door?" "The upper door, the one that connects the stairwell to the basement. When we leave through the tunnel, anyone who finds this place after us, anyone alive who gets into the basement, will find the coal room, the upper door, and the stairs down. If the upper door is open or can be opened, they find the war room, the well, the provisions, the tunnel." "That's good," Pierce said. "That's what we want. If the upper door is open, anything in the basement also finds the stairs down, and the war room, and the tunnel." Silence. "I need to go up," I said, "and check the upper door. If it has a lock on the stairwell side, I can lock it from inside and come back down through the war room. Sealed. Anyone who gets into the basement from above won't be able to get past it. And anyone who gets into the basement from above won't be able to get down here," Wade said. "Yes. So you're locking people out." "I'm locking everything out. Whatever comes first." Wade looked at me for a long time. The emergency lights were long dead, and we were talking by the light of a candle. Margaret's altar candle. The one she'd taken from the church of no particular church. The one we'd been burning sparingly. In its light, his face was angular and serious. "That means if there are survivors up there in the building, in the basement, they can't get to the shelter. They can't get to the water. They can't get to the tunnel." "That's correct. And you're okay with that?" I was not okay with it. I was the furthest thing from okay with it. I was a woman who had spent 22 years in a filing room making sure that every document was accessible, every record retrievable, every piece of information available to anyone who needed it. My entire professional life was built on the principle that things should be findable. And I was about to lock a door and make this place, this shelter, this water, this exit, unfindable. But Eli was somewhere in this city, and the tunnel was a way out. And if I left the upper door open, the dead could follow the path we'd found, down through the stairwell, into the war room, into the tunnel, and out through the exit at Riverside Park. The tunnel would become a conduit, not an escape. "I'm going to lock it," I said. Pierce wiped his face. Wade nodded, once. I went up the stairs. I threw the lower deadbolt open. I climbed to the upper door. The landing was dark and cold, and I could hear through the steel the building above. Not footsteps now, but a low ambient sound, a collective rustling, as if the building were full of people moving very slowly in every direction. The upper door had a deadbolt on the stairwell side, matching the lower door, identical hardware. I threw it. The bolt seated into the frame with a sound that was heavier than any sound a piece of metal should make. The sound of a decision becoming physical, becoming permanent, becoming a fact that someone would have to live with. I went back down. I sealed the lower door behind me. 2 deadbolts, 2 doors between us and the building. Sealed, locked, finished. On the legal pad, I wrote, "Upper door locked, lower door locked, tunnel open. April 12th, 4:47 p.m. 3 survivors exiting via tunnel. Ruth Kavanaugh, Hargrove City Hall Records." I left the legal pad on the long table in the war room. Next to the blueprints, next to the inventory I'd made of the provisions, next to the notes about the well and the air calculations and the shift schedule for the digging. I left it all. A record, filed, organized, complete, for whoever finds this place next, if anyone ever does. And if they come from the right direction. We exited through the tunnel at 5:20 p.m. on April 12th. The rain had slowed to a mist. The light was gray and failing. I went first, then Pierce, then Wade. We crawled out of the earth onto the wet grass of Riverside Park and lay there for a moment. 3 filthy, exhausted people flat on their backs in a public park, looking at the sky. The clouds were low and fast moving, the kind of spring overcast that could break at any moment into clear evening light or into heavier rain. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen the sky. 2 days. It had been 2 days. The park was empty. The river was high with the week's rain, fast, running south. Across the river, the East Bank, residential, modest houses. The edge of a neighborhood I knew from property records as the Riverside Addition, platted in 1954. Some of those houses had lights on. Not electric. Lantern light, candle light, the warm, irregular glow of fire behind glass. People, living people, in houses, on the other side of a river that the dead couldn't cross. The bridge, Pierce said. He meant the pedestrian bridge at the south end of the park, a concrete span that crossed the Lehigh to the East Bank. It was 400 yards south. We walked. My legs didn't cooperate at first. 49 hours of crawling and digging had locked my knees and hips into positions that standing contradicted, and the first 100 yards were a stumbling, graceless negotiation with my own body. Pierce was worse, moving with a stiffness that suggested something in his lower back had given way during the digging. Wade moved best of the three of us, his delivery driver body recovering faster from abuse. The pedestrian bridge was intact. We crossed it. The East Bank had a walking path, then a row of houses. The first house with light in its windows was a yellow Cape Cod with a porch light that was actually electric. Someone had a generator. Wade knocked. A woman opened the door, middle-aged, holding a flashlight, wearing a bathrobe. She looked at us, covered in clay, soaked with rain, blinking in the light of her hallway. And her face went through a sequence of expressions that settled on something between wariness and recognition. "You're from across the river," she said. Not a question. "City Hall," I said. "Jesus, come in." Her name was not important, and I say that not to be cruel, but because what mattered was the house, the warmth, the electric light powered by a Honda generator in the garage, the kitchen table where she set down cups of coffee, instant, made with tap water from a well that still worked, and the ordinariness of sitting in a chair and drinking something warm out of a mug with a picture of a Labrador on it. She told us what she knew. The East Bank was mostly clear. The river acted as a natural barrier, and the few dead that had washed up on the bank had been dealt with by residents with hunting rifles. A loose network of households was sharing resources. No government contact, no military presence, no information beyond what battery radios had caught in fragments. It was everywhere. It was spreading. The government was maintaining containment perimeters around areas it could still hold. I asked her about Hargrove High School. She didn't know. The high school was on the West Bank, in the main part of the town. Nobody from the East Bank had crossed back. I drank my coffee. It was terrible. Thin, bitter, over-extracted from cheap crystals. It was the best thing I've ever tasted. Later, in a bedroom, she gave us a child's room. Bunk beds, dinosaur wallpaper. I lay in the lower bunk and stared at the slats above me and thought about what I'd left behind. The war room, the well, the provisions, the tunnel, all of it sealed, locked, recorded on a legal pad on a table in a room that nobody alive knew how to reach from above. I thought about the people who might have come to City Hall after us, who might have found the basement, the coal room, the gray steel door, who might have pulled the ring and found it locked, and not known that 26 feet below them was water and food and an 800-foot passage to safety. I thought about Eli. I thought about him trying the door. The lock I'd thrown was the right decision. The tunnel had to be protected. A conduit works in both directions. And an open path from the basement to the park would have been an open path from the park to the basement. And the dead don't stop moving, and the dead don't need to rest. And the dead would have followed the air down into the earth, and out the other side, and into the park, and across the bridge, and into these houses with their generator lights, and their coffee, and their dinosaur wallpaper. I locked the door. I'd lock it again. I'd lock it every time, in every version of this day. Because the math is the math, And 3 living people plus a sealed tunnel equals survival, and an open tunnel equals nothing. But there's a door in a coal room in the basement of Hargrove City Hall, and it's locked, and my son might be on the other side of it. And I will carry that weight for as long as I carry anything. Outside, through the dinosaur curtains, the last light was failing over the river. And in that light, diffuse gray, barely there, I could see the western bank and the buildings of my town, and somewhere among them, the flat roof of City Hall, and below it, in the dark, a room I knew by heart, still there, still sealed, still holding what I'd left in it, which was everything I knew how to give. The legal pad, the inventory, the blueprints, Olmsted's plans, sheet 7 through sheet 13, laid out on the table in order, annotated in my hand, waiting to be read by someone who would come from the right direction and find the door unlocked from the tunnel's side and the water still flowing and the provisions still stacked and the records still legible, filed, organized, complete, the way I leave things. Thank you for listening to this one all the way through. I wrote this story because I wanted to think about the people who keep systems running and never get recognized for it. The clerks, the file managers, the administrative staff who know where everything is and how everything works, because they've been in the same building for 2 decades, and nobody else bothered to learn. Ruth isn't a hero in any traditional sense. She's a person who files things and remembers details and shows up early to check for water damage. And it turns out that's exactly the person you want when the world falls apart inside a building she knows better than anyone alive. The deeper question is about doors. Who locks them, who gets locked out, and whether the person holding the key can live with the mathematics of that choice. Ruth locked a door to protect a tunnel, and that decision was correct, and it will haunt her for the rest of her life. I think most real moral decisions work that way. The right choice and the painful choice are the same choice, and you don't get to feel clean about it afterward. 3 questions I'd love to hear you wrestle with. First, the practical one. Ruth estimated 14 days of breathable air in the sealed war room based on CO2 buildup rates. Was she right to dig in sealed conditions rather than opening the stairwell doors for better air exchange? Given the risk that the upper latch might not hold, would you have made the same call? Second, the moral one. Ruth locked the upper door, permanently sealing the war room from the basement above. That lock protects the tunnel exit, but also blocks any future survivor who enters the basement from reaching the shelter, the water, and the escape route. Was she right? If Eli had arrived at that door an hour after she locked it, does that change your answer? Third, the personal one. Ruth spent 22 years being invisible, doing essential work that nobody acknowledged or remembered. It took the end of the world for her knowledge to matter. What does it say about how we value people that the person who knew the building best was the one nobody ever asked? That last question isn't really about Ruth. It's about the person in your life, your office, your building, your community, who knows where everything is and never gets thanked for it. Thank them.